Fantasy Flight Games has just revealed Maria Hill, who is going to be in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. expansion released in February. And this hero looks really amazing and has surpassed my expectations. She's so interesting, so unique, very different. Very much a support character, but as you might know from support characters already in Marvel Champions, they tend to be so good at supporting that they can support themselves to a very strong victory. Looking at, Doctor Strange, Scarlet Witch, Storm, Cyclops, Cable, so she's definitely going to be solo viable, even if you get more out of her in multiplayer. So if you like any of those characters, you could be in good hands here, but she also works a little bit differently. So let's talk about that. I'm going to be analyzing her. I'm going to be going through what kind of aspect cards she'll work with, how she'll work, all that kind of thing, and at the end, rating her for power. So I'm Villain Theory, and let's get into this. Maria Hill has 3 recovery, which is pretty standard, 9 hit points, which is a little bit low, 6 hand size, and 5 in hero form, pretty standard stuff. She has the shield trait in Alter Ego, which is expected, but she is the first character to have the shield trait in hero form, which is kind of interesting and will have certain implications for certain cards. In Alter Ego, she says you may include the maximum number of copies of free shield support in your deck from aspects other than your chosen aspect. This is really confusing phrasing, like really confusing, but what this means is that, let's say you're building her in leadership, you could choose 3 shield supports from, let's say, 1 in aggression, 1 in justice, 1 in protection, but then you have to have the maximum amount of copies of it. So I could choose to have, 3 tac teams, 3 med teams, and 3 surveillance teams in my leadership deck. I could not have 1 tac team, 3 surveillance teams. I have to have the maximum amount of whatever 3 I've chosen. Now, I wouldn't worry too much about this. It'll become more clear as we go through the video, but she's got some new shield supports which are going to change up the way you do that, and there are only 1 copy of each of them, so it will probably be less confusing to actually build decks for her than it sounds. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Action Exhaust Maria Hill. Search your deck for a shield support and add it to your hand. So this is kind of a little bit like Jubilee. She can exhaust in hero form to generate a wild, while you can exhaust Maria Hill to draw a card. And this is particularly useful when we look at the new shield supports which she has. They're kind of crazy. That's the first thing we're going to look at after this. But keep in mind that you're basically going to be able to find something super powerful, albeit super expensive, to kind of set you up in the early game. To me, that looks like the main use of this so far. But there are other uses, kind of interesting. If you don't exhaust in the Alter Ego, once you're in hero form, you have 2 forwarding or 1 attack that you could use. So 1 attack is a little bit low, especially considering they have revealed that she has no attack or forward events or anything like that. She effectively functions all through shield supports. She's the director of shield, and she functions through directing them. So really, really interesting. It's giving a little bit of, Cyclops with its allies, except now it's Maria Hill with her shield supports. I think it's going to be fun, but definitely she's not going to have a ton of damage on demand on the first turn. 2 forwarding is fine though, especially, quite good for solo play. 2 defense, better than 1. So her starting stats are fine, but I wouldn't worry too much about them. It's definitely not going to be any kind of focus for her. So she says each ally you control gains the shield trait. So this is Star-Lord, but for shield, Shield Lord, Shield Lady, I don't know. But basically, that's fascinating for how it interacts with a little card called Field Agent, more than anything else I've found so far, although she has a new card which also, interacts with things which share a trait with you, which now all these allies you're playing will while you're in hero form. So kind of interesting. And then she has Reassignment, which is an action, move 1 all-purpose counter from a shield support to another shield support, limit once per round. So an all-purpose counter is, any kind of counter you put on something that isn't, a threat token or damage, anything you put on energy barrier or, Ironheart's progress counters, the little counter that represents that is an all-purpose counter. So it can be on 1 shield support representing whatever kind of counter that has. You can put it on a new one, and now it's that kind of counter. So that's really, really useful. So what you can do is move a counter from a cheaper shield support onto one of those crazy expensive ones she now has access to that are super powerful, and basically charge them up that way, which is a good conversion ratio as we'll look into. So basically, to make Maria Hill keep up with the superheroes, they've made this normal kind of human become a fleet commander. She has her own fleet of special helicarriers, which is insane. I kind of love it. And her signature one is the Iliad, and it's 6 cost, which is just crazy expensive, and it comes in with 3 uses. And it has an action: exhaust the Iliad and remove a counter. Choose deal 5 damage or remove 4 threat. These are the big choices here. They're going to be the best ones. They're really good. Let's say you're playing solo. Side scheme comes in, boom, exhaust Iliad, remove 4 threat, gone. Minion comes in, boom, deal 5 damage. It's probably gone. Or maybe I had to exhaust Maria Hill to pop the tough of, I don't know. But that's really, really good. Very versatile, very reliable. Now, it has 3 uses. So let's say I deal 5 damage 3 times. That's 15 damage across 3 turns for a, 6 cost, 7 effective resource kind of card. And that's actually not that impressive. But Maria Hill is full of, a few different ways to put counters on it, including that hero ability to move a counter from somewhere else onto this. So that's quite useful. So you're effectively, I think, aiming to play this early and keep it in play, keep it stocked up with counters, because as soon as you spend that last counter, it's gone. So don't let it fall below 1, just keep recharging it and get more value that way. It does have a heal option, which I think is significantly less valuable than the other options, but there will be some emergency situations you might use it on yourself. Maybe you're paired up with that angry Drax and, you got to keep him healed so he doesn't have to flip and lose all his counters, that kind of thing. It's interesting that it has it. I'd rather it had a third option that's less appealing than no third option, but definitely I think I'm looking at deal 5 or move 4 for this most of the time. And that's not all, because she has aspect helicarriers, which are, currently not all revealed. We've seen 2 out of 4. We've seen the leadership and protection one. Leadership 1, and also these are all 6 cost as well. The leadership 1 comes with 2 counters, so does the protection 1. So you're getting less counters than the Iliad initially, but like the Iliad, you can, move counters from elsewhere to charge these up. And you're going to want to do that because I think these are more powerful than the Iliad in terms of raw value. The Iliad is more flexible though. It can do 3 different things. So, I still think the Iliad, especially in solo play, that's going to be the kind of reliable problem solver with an option for every occasion. Whereas the other cards maybe get higher value, but are more situational to some degree. So the Cerebro, action, exhaust it, remove a counter. You get to put an ally into play from hand, and you can choose any player to do that. So in multiplayer, whoever has the juiciest, most expensive ally, you can choose them, and boom, it's in play. Just bypassing their expensive costs. Of course, the Cerebro is expensive to make up for that, but of course, if you keep restocking the counters, it's just going to be a money generator, which is kind of insane. So I really like that. Use it in solo play, take Nick Fury in your deck, or whatever else. Potentially, the value for this, if you play, let's say, a 3 or 4 cost ally, it's going to be what I'd call 4 or 5 effective resources. So if I'm trying to play a 3 cost ally, and I have a hand of 5 cards, I have to declare I'm playing the ally, and that card is kind of gone. Then I have to pick 3 other cards, maybe from hand, to pay for it, which leaves me 1 card out of 5 left. So every card is a potential resource. Basically, 4 cards are gone, 4 effective resources. The Cerebro, I think, is kind of getting that minimum if you're going to use it. You could use it for cheaper in an emergency, but you could just use it on a 4 cost or 5 effective resources. Getting 5 effective resources for 1 counter use here is kind of crazy. So to compare with the Iliad, I think its best option is deal 5 or remove 4, probably equivalent to like maybe 2.5 resources for a hero card kind of thing. So the Cerebro getting up to like 5 effective resources is a huge step up, even if you have to have the right ally, to really get the value and use it. So a little bit more situational in that regard, but the value is also potentially a lot higher per counter, but comes in with less counters. So depending on how much counter generation you have going on Maria Hill at that point in time, interesting decisions, right? The Pericles almost feels like underwhelming compared to just talking about the Cerebro, but it's so good. Action. Exhaust it and remove 1 counter from it. Give a hero or villain a status card of your choice. So, the villain is stalwart. Just keep making a hero, potentially your hero, Maria Hill, tough. Great. But if they're not steady or stalwart, you might just permanently confuse them, basically, and that's really, really fun. But that's only half of it, because you can also give an ally or minion a status card of your choice, which, the highest value thing you can do there is give an ally a tough, and then you have like a reliable blocker all the time, which is also really good. Effectively, using this gives you the means to stop 2 villain activations, although I would say putting a tough on an ally has like some kind of, small tempo issue, because, you exhaust the ally to defend, it hits the tough, but then they're exhausted, you can't use their stats, it's a small thing, but it is notable. So blocking a villain activation tends to be worth 2 effective resources. A lot of people say like a 1 cost kind of card, or, let's say a 2 cost ally, which also does something else. So let's say 1 cost, 2 effective resources is what we're looking at. For the first sentence and the second sentence here, you can say this is worth 4 effective resources, which is very, very good per use. But because of the tempo problems, I might say 3.5. But, the Iliad, let's say, being 2.5, Pericles being, 3.5, and the Cerebro being up to 5, maybe 4. Whichever one you use, you're getting a lot of value per counter. I think, the Cersei is slightly more conditional than the others, but the Pericles is also more conditional than the Iliad. So the stronger they are, the more conditional. But I don't think those conditions are going to be that hard to meet to get pretty good value from these. So, yeah, maybe in solo you open up with the Iliad to keep problems under control, but the Cersei is going to carry you over the finish line with crazy, crazy value. And I should say, by putting the ally into play, it bypasses trait restrictions, which we're going to look at in a little bit. But long story short, you could put this in an aggression deck because she can take leadership, shield supports off aspect, and then take maybe the Gamora basic ally and, cheat her into play. You can totally do that. And I think that would be a great use of it. My one concern here is actually more in regards to maybe solo play, in regards to the Iliad. It kind of feels like whatever encounter card you get, it can kind of solve it. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Multigun for Venom, which isn't quite the same, but I don't like kind of how convenient it is sometimes. I kind of feel like it makes problem solving a little bit easy because you always have the solution. So those are my concern for this, that the Iliad is going to be too flexible, notably in solo play, where you typically get one encounter card per round, and the Iliad is going to take care of most of it. But nonetheless, I still think it's going to be fun, and I think the fact that the other huge helicarriers potentially get you more value per counter than the Iliad means, yeah, I can just rely on the Iliad and do well, but to play her to her maximum potential, I'm going to want to try and get value from the other ones. And I will say these have huge setup costs. If I want to play the Iliad, the Cersei, and the Pericles, that is a total of 21 effective resources, which is multiple turns worth of setup, basically. So yeah, it's not going to be super viable to just spam these out back to back unless people are covering for you in multiplayer. So she also has one copy of a card called Shield Director, which is a unique upgrade. So this 2-cost thing says exhaust it and place a counter on a shield support. I can place this on the Cersei and boom, I'm ready to drop another, 4-cost ally down. So that is huge, huge value. Between whichever of these big supports you put this counter on, it could be anywhere from like 2.5 to 5, effective resources of value. That is insane for a 2-cost upgrade. What is holding it back and some of these helicarrier, shield supports back is that if they have multiple counters on, you can't spend them on the same turn. So, it's slower tempo, but it's incredibly good value. And I think the long story short here of Maria Hill in general, but hopefully you guys are seeing it build up here, is that once the engine is running, she's going to be an absolute powerhouse of insane value. But the first, I would say, 3 to 4 turns are going to be a little bit slower than maybe the average hero. But turns, 5 plus, you're probably going to be in a very good position. Kind of like Einhart or maybe like, Special Doctor, SPDR Spider. Got to set up, and then you just go. So Shield Director, super valuable. I think the fear is I draw this in my opening hand where I want to maybe play the Iliad or something, and I can't afford both, obviously, because one of them is 6 cost. So I'm kind of going to have to maybe lose out on Shield Director or, really slow down my setup by playing Shield Director and not a big, shield support when I've got my Ultra Go hand size to fund it. But I kind of think that makes superpower training, the side scheme which puts an upgrade into play, almost mandatory for her, especially because she can easily remove it with like the Iliad or something. Because you are going to want to get this card, absolutely. This is a very, very high priority. She also has 2 copies of a special resource card called Special Funding. Response after you spend this to pay for a shield support, place one all-purpose counter on that support after it enters play. Also, it has 2 resource icons on it. So it's a double resource that adds a super powerful counter to one of these super powerful shield supports that you could get. And this makes this one of the best resource cards in the game, up there with Ironhearts in my opinion, up there with Captain Marvels. If I've valued the Cersei at being able to potentially, per counter, give like 4 to 5 resources of value, then you could argue that this is a 6 to 7 resource card. And it's not exactly the same because I've got to set up this expensive thing first. I can only spend 1 counter per turn, so overloading it with counters is not going to immediately help me. But it is really, really good value, even if you, reduce it for tempo purposes and, setup purposes. It's still very, very good. Just having a double resource is very, very good. So this helps Maria tremendously on the resource front to get some of these expensive things in play, but also to get these super powerful counters, which fuel her Fleet of Doom. So yeah, these are good cards. Really, really good cards. So before we go any further, I want to discuss Maria Hill's second hero ability, the action, move a counter from a shield support to another shield support. We can look at the cheaper ones to fuel those 6-cost ones, and that's going to be incredibly good. I've sort of mentioned that already. I will say med team, I think the value is so good, especially if you're using perhaps like the Cersei to cheat in these expensive allies. You might want to just keep healing them with that, but I think most of the other shield supports in the game, like Tac Team, Surveillance Team, and the ones you see on the screen, going to be really good options to move counters over to the expensive ones. I will say it is interesting that each ally you control gains a shield trait, because suddenly Field Agent becomes extra useful, whereas typically it's not been that useful historically. But that's the only kind of thing that she can make such good use out of all of these supports that moving a counter from them, I don't know, it's going to hurt more than usual because she gets more out of them than usual, but her big supports are so good. I typically think, at best, you're losing kind of one resource of value to gain a minimum of like 2.5. So it's still pretty much a good trade, whatever you're doing, from these cheaper ones to the expensive ones. The long story short here is once you have one or two of these big sort of shield supports in play, and I do think he might ideally aim to have two of them in play, because I think 3 will be hard to keep them fully stocked up, and I think that's where the value comes from, kind of getting almost infinite uses from them. So my thoughts are aim for 2 of the expensive ones. Maybe it'll be one of the expensive ones, one of the cheaper ones, but I'm really the value's so good, I think, 2 of the expensive ones. Then once you have Shield Director in play, and maybe a supply of cheaper shield supports to provide counters, with Maria Hill's ability to move them over, you should be able to use 2 of the big ones every single turn, ultra reliably. And once you're in that position, that's the game is on a timer and you're gonna win. So that's kind of how I see her win condition: build up and then win with this overwhelming value. And I think that's kind of fun. I think if you like to build up a board, that's going to be exciting for you. Although, she's putting in a lot of these heavy, expensive cards, so you're not going to get like 50 things on the board to activate in sequence, but you're probably going to have a few that are extremely impactful. And the fun does not end there, because we have on the double and reinforcements. So one of the concerns I've been saying is tempo. Oh, you got too many counters, can't spend them all at once. But on the double is a 0-cost card, of which she has 2 copies, and it's an action, and most of her stuff is an action, by the way. You can use it from alter ego or hero form. Ready any number of shield supports with a combined printed cost of 6 or less. So you can ready up one of the huge ones, or multiple of the small ones, and that's just let you spend more counters more quickly, so you're not overwhelmed with all these counters that you couldn't possibly spend. Really useful. Now, it's not giving you anything you don't already have, it's just bringing it forward a turn. So the value is a little bit harder to kind of calculate and consider. In general, for a character that can build up these super high value engines, just increasing the tempo is going to be really useful. Similar for reinforcement, 1-cost event, action, choose any number of shield supports with a combined printed cost of 6 or less. You're seeing the theme here, that's how they're limiting it. Place 1 all-purpose counter on each of those supports. I think for the most part, you will use this on 1 6-cost, just because getting multiple of the small ones out, it's kind of more setup, you're going to have to find more pieces, and the value won't always, or maybe not often, ever, outweigh, the Cersei or the Iliad, so I feel like you're mostly using this on the more expensive ones, but it does have that good flexibility. So there's a lot of moving pieces on this character. I'm going to use this opportunity to say, this character is so different to normal. I'm not sure my prediction is going to be as accurate as normal. So take everything I'm saying with a pinch of salt, or kind of an idea to explore and see how it lands when the character is here. But I think these are really interesting kind of tactical cards to go with her very, supportive style, which I'm really looking forward to. It is kind of everything I wanted. Her precon also has a card which interacts with shield support, so I think it's relevant to mention it here. I'm probably going to cover most of the aspect stuff in this video instead of a separate one like normal, because it's very relevant to Maria Hill. So this is a shield ally, which doesn't matter hugely for Maria Hill, because all of her allies become shield. But it's 3 cost, 2 forwarding, 1 attack, 2 hit points. Response after she enters play, ready as shield support. When I first saw this, I thought, wow, this looks pretty good for Maria Hill. Getting more readying, more tempo on some of those things, kind of useful. And you can just forward once and block, and her defense isn't that great, so that's going to be useful. But then I looked at Agent 13, who for 1 extra cost can, instead of just readying up 1 shield support, she can ready shield supports up to 3 times, and, get 4 extra forwarding compared to Victoria. I don't see a world where you run Victoria and not Agent 13. I think Agent 13 is strictly superior, especially on a character that can get the Cersei, which so far seems to be the highest value of the shield supports that she can get. Long story short here, when you're building a Maria Hill deck, if this isn't in her precon, grab your other copy of it, put it in there, because Agent 13 is going to be Maria Hill's best friend, her unofficial signature ally, if you will. The next card I want to talk about is Support Staff, which, as Nelson pointed out on the live stream we did, is basically Web Shooter. It's a 1-cost support. It has 3 counters. You spend 1 to generate a wild resource, kind of like Web Shooter, but that's an upgrade. But the main difference here is that, well, A, it has a shield trait, which can be useful for Maria, but B, it can generate that resource for any identity with the shield trait. So, if Hawkeye's alter ego, you can use this to help him, pay for stuff. If Nick Fury, the other hero in the box, who presumably will also have shield on the hero side, there's almost no way he doesn't, you could use this to generate a resource for him as well. So pretty flexible, very supporty, but you can just fund your own stuff just fine. So I really like this. It's, 2 effective resources to gain 3 effective resources, which is, money printing money very quickly within itself, which I like. She also has 1 copy of the hard call. I wonder if this is a reference to Make the Call, which is very known for combining with Maria, but this is very different. Thematically, I love this. Look at her in that art. She is struggling with this. Look at the flavor text. Sometimes it just comes down to numbers. More people die if I don't act than if I do. That's heavy. So it's a hero action. Discard a shield support you control. Deal damage to each enemy equal to the cost of the shield support you discarded. That is insane. It's got lots of drawbacks. It's not something you're just going to play every time you see it, but in the right situation, it's very useful. It's going to make memorable moments. I want you to picture the scene in multiplayer. People can't keep up. There's minions coming up faster than you can take them out. You're struggling for whatever reason. And hey, just for fun, let's say it's a multi-villain scenario. You can just drop the Iliad down on the battlefield and wipe out basically every minion and hit every villain. And that's probably going to be its best use case. But let's take it to solo play, or even in multiplayer still. You can use this toward the end of the game to end the game. So you can, when the villain is almost defeated, or you want to put them in that position, take something like the Pericles, which doesn't deal any damage, and drop that for 6 damage to progress you to that win condition to finish off the villain. And it's pretty similar to go down swinging in some of its mechanics. But for the most part, board clear or finish off the villain. So that's all the cards we know from Maria Hill so far. We don't know the first 3, but we do know they are each unique. So there's going to be 3 separate cards, 1 copy of each to make up those. And then there's a 14th card, which I'm going to guess is an upgrade, and I'm going to guess it's something like Maria Hill's pistol or something, because she's seen in some of the art with a pistol, but we haven't seen anything yet. But I'm not quite sure. It could just be, that she has that weapon, so she can do something rather than just her supports entirely, since everything else seems to be support-based. I'm curious if her first 3 cards will be signature allies, or at least 2 of them, because we had, Bishop, and then before that Domino in the last 2 expansions, each having 2 signature allies. Maybe she joins that kind of theme. Andy N put a really interesting idea in Discord, kind of around her having these interesting allies. So I'm kind of hopeful that they have done it. So what I kind of want to focus on now is Maria Hill's ability to give allies the shield trait. I think that's really, really interesting. So we have Government Liaison that can put shield cards from your hand into play for 1 cost cheaper, but they don't gain the shield trait while they're in your hand, only once they're in play. So that doesn't work. But you could use Government Liaison to play Sky Destroyer. I think the only reason you wouldn't do that is because she already has some slower tempo and lots of expensive stuff to play. But Sky Destroyer is basically going to trigger every turn, because any ally you play becomes shield, and once it becomes shield, the timing is quick enough to affect Sky Destroyer's response, so it can trigger that 2 damage from it. So that's really interesting. And these shield supports, which she can take from other aspects, kind of interact together. So as I kind of alluded to, the Cersei can get an expensive ally, and then the med team can keep them healed up, and Field Agent can stop them taking damage in the first place. And Field Agent specifically works here, again, because she makes allies shield. And with the Cersei, the sky is kind of the limit. We can have even 5 or 6 cost allies. I think that's really interesting. Dum Dum Dugan is going to have new shield stuff that he can potentially exhaust to get those bonuses, so he's better than ever here. And you could then keep these healed up with med teams. And for Hercules, Field Agent will give him an extra use every counter. We also, as I mentioned, Gamora, it's also Rocket. You can cheat in, whoever you want because you ignore trait restrictions. So I think that's going to be really fun, especially for multiplayer. So I'm going to really enjoy that. And Field Agent, keeping, Gamora alive forever and ever and ever. Suddenly, that's really good. We also have characters like Giant Man. Giant Man specifically does more damage when he's at higher hit points. So Med Team or Field Agent, or even both of them in some weird combination, keeping him healthy is going to be really good. There's a few allies kind of in this ballpark. And, Cersei cheating him in, such good value. Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about some of the cards in her pre-con that I think she will like a lot still. So we have Organizational Support, which is a bit of a crazy card. It's kind of a combination of Band Together and Strength in numbers, and those are very good cards, which means Organizational Support is probably going to be very good. Now, it's a single resource card, but as an interrupt, you get to exhaust 3 allies or supports that share a trait with your identity, generate the printed resources on each of those cards exhausted this way. So if you exhaust 3 allies and all supports, you get 4 resources, which is crazy. The downside is you're going to have to set up a lot to do that, but even before you get to that point, it's still going to be a single resource worst case, where it's band together, generates a maximum of 3, but starts at 0. The advantage of band together, though, is it doesn't have to exhaust anything, but the advantage of organizational support is that it works for supports as well, although these things do have to share a trait with you. So there's a lot of back and forth with this, but getting up to full potential resources in a world that now has these 6-cost big aspect shield supports, kind of interesting. Very similar to Strength in Numbers, which as a 0-cost card has to exhaust allies to draw cards. It will draw you 3 cards when you exhaust 3 things, compared to organizational support getting you 4 resources, but it's not locked to traits. Card draw is generally better than resources. So there's pros and cons to all of these. I think I slightly prefer band together and strength in numbers, but I am excited to see how organizational support works, especially for Maria Hill, who's going to make all these allies shield, so she could exhaust a huge variety of these cheap allies potentially to set that up, kind of like you would with strength in numbers. And Starlord as well makes everyone a guardian. Could be interesting there. We'll have to see how it works out, but I definitely think it could be interesting to get these big expensive helicarriers in for Maria. We also have Grant Ward, a 0-cost shield spy ally, and this ally is fascinating because a 0-cost ally, what? 2/4 to attack 3 hit points? Well, the first catch is that Grant Ward cannot defend, so he's not a chump blocker. But secondly, he's got this force response. After you reveal a treachery, you may spend a mental resource. If you do not, take 2 damage, damage equal to his attack, and remove Grant Ward from the game. Basically, he is a traitor, and when a treachery comes up, he, shows his own treachery, punches you in the face, and runs away. Really thematic, honestly, to have like an ally that's actually a traitor. And I think the mental resource represents you kind of staying ahead of him. Honestly, playing him for 0, forwarding for 2. If I then lose him and he hits me for 2, fine. It's not the end of the world. I got 2 forwarding. If I get a side scheme or a minion or an attachment as my encounter card instead of a treachery, I get another 2 forwarding. And if that happens again, another 2 forwarding, or attack. That's really, really good. And if I do get a treachery, I have the option to spend a mental resource. And in that case, if let's say the 0-cost, the 1 effective resource his card is, maybe gets us that initial 2 forwarding or attack, the next mental resource to keep him around gets us another 2 forwarding or attack. Paying this mental resource is not a big cost to keep getting 2 forwarding. So he's just good. If you have Ingenuity, maybe a Bruce Banner, you can then have that mental guaranteed. Anything like Quinn Carrier, gonna guarantee it. Very, very good. It's not super relevant for Maria Hill. I'm just kind of going through all the, the final couple of cards that come with her precon that aren't ultra relevant to her, but still might be good for her, honestly, because, if I'm spending my whole hand on a huge shield support, maybe this 0-cost ally is something I can actually afford afterwards. Someone in Nelson's chat, I think, suggested this for Hulk. And yeah, Hulk would love 0-cost for 2 forwarding, potentially 6 forwarding. And if he takes 2 damage from Grant Ward betraying him, he doesn't care. I also think it's interesting that they have this kind of resource thing to keep the ally on the board, which reminds me of Blade, who's also cheaper than the average ally. And, you have to pay a physical for him to keep him around if you're using him, representing the vampiric red ketchup he really, really loves. But yeah, Grant Ward to me looks very good, especially with Noble Sacrifice coming in Magneto's pack releasing today. 1-cost event, discard an ally you control, so you get rid of Grant on your own terms. You don't have to worry about him betraying you. You've kind of betrayed him nobly, and you get to heal 3 hit points, basically, equal to his hit points, and you get a tough status card. So Grant enters play, you fought for 2, then you sacrifice him, get 3 healing and a tough. That's actually really good value for the combined cost of these cards. Like, that's really, really good. The other thing you can do is just ready him up and use all his consequential, hit point damage up before he has a chance to betray you. And that's kind of fun too, if, maybe not ideal. The last card before we get back to, real Maria-specific stuff is Front Organization, which basically says when an encounter card would discard a card you control, discard Front Organization instead. And as a support, for 0-cost, you play it, it sticks around, and when something like Caught Off Guard comes up, you discard this instead. Although it was pointed out to me by Nelson that Caught Off Guard will just discard this, normally instead. You could just choose it to do that rather than use this interrupt. But hey, you can do it either way. For me, I think this is part of the pre-con as an accessibility thing, kind of saying you want to protect your big shield helicarriers with cheap cards. I don't think this makes many decks outside of the pre-con, but it will be a great tech card against Standard 2, which has this overwhelming force card, which discards the highest cost thing you have. There's a couple of cards like that in certain scenarios as well, making Front Organization a tech card in most places, but kind of a learning card in terms of the pre-con is how I see it. Overall with Maria, I just think getting, one or two of these big supports out, keeping them stocked up, readying them up, it's going to be huge value once the engine is going, as I keep saying. But I think the first 2 to 3 turns going to be slower than you might expect. With, turns 4, definitely turn 5, you're an absolute powerhouse. So standard play, I think she's going to be exceptionally strong. Might feel a little bit like Ironheart. I think in expert mode, that slow start is going to hurt you more, but that will be offset almost entirely in multiplayer with a good team, which you can start to generate stupidly good value for. If you ever do something like heroic mode, I'm not sure Maria Hill is going to be the character, but I'm happy to be wrong. I think if you like to build up, she can be really fun. If you like tactical choices, she's going to be really fun. And one of my concerns is just that the Iliad, in solo play especially, is going to solve too many problems, but we'll have to wait and see. It could turn out to be absolutely fine, and I'm kind of expecting it to. She just looks so fun. Moving on to the aspects, we'll start with aggression, and I think she'll like Tag Team for the counters. It's not the most efficient card, but she will get more out of it than the average hero. And then you've got a lot of good allies that you can, block consequential damage with Field Agent or heal with Med Team. Gold Ball's maybe one of the first among them, since he can do potentially 4 damage. We also have Dust, who is really interesting. So she can hit the whole board with extra consequential damage. Let's say you put Enraged on her, she could be taking 4 consequential damage. But if you have the Pericles in, you can keep giving her a tough, so she can keep hitting the whole board for like 4+ damage every turn. I think that's kind of interesting. Very, very slow setup, but very high payoff like for multiplayer. So just a kind of weird combo I wanted to put out there as something I'm kind of excited to try, even if it's just for fun. But more competitively, probably just going for the powerhouse aggression allies and, keeping them healed or stopping them taking damage that way. For Justice, I think it gets a little more interesting. Field Agent kind of goes without saying. But with the Pericles, able to put a Confuse on the villain and a minion kind of every turn, Float Like a Butterfly could be interesting. I think, especially for solo play, what puts me off this is that it's a slow kind of, tempo card. It doesn't do a lot immediately. And you've also got a lot of slow stuff going on Maria Hill. But I think that could be really fun. Monica Cheng, though, getting in extra surveillance teams, putting extra counters on it, that's just going to fuel all your other stuff, let you move counters, no problem. And it's already good baseline, so I kind of feel like that goes without saying as well. Haven't really talked about these cards throughout the video, but they're kind of the obvious thing, I think, for a shield-oriented character. Global Logistics and Homeland Intervention, since they exhaust shield cards to do what they want to do, and Maria Hill makes other cards, other allies, shield, you're going to have more choices than ever to exhaust for them, which is really, really good. And I love these cards, especially Global Logistics, one of my favorites. So yeah, I'm looking forward to playing Maria Hill with these as well. Leadership is interesting. We've got Command Team, obviously, but also the Triskelion, which we can exhaust for organization or support for an easy resource. So all kind of interesting there, especially as Med Team and Field Agent can keep your allies alive. Using the Triskelion to increase your ally limit could actually be very, very useful. Beast is incredibly good for her because her resource card is kind of ridiculous. So you can use the Cersei to cheat Beast into play, and then Beast will get you your special funding card, which means you can play a big shield thing, and just get extra counters on it is kind of what I'm thinking. Or even a small shield card it's still good for. It's just such a good resource card, which makes Beast incredibly good for her. Then I've got Giant Man kind of standing in for all those expensive allies that are really going to be good for Cersei as well. Part of leadership I'm personally a bit less excited to talk about, but will be good with Maria, is recursion. If the Cersei is cheating in really expensive allies, you can use rapid response to cheaply keep getting them back in after you're done using those allies. And if you've got lots of expensive allies, Call for Backup is just a really powerful card anyway, so why not include that? Next up, we have Protection, which has less things that I'm excited for with Maria Hill, but potentially I'm still very, very excited for this. So Med Team kind of goes without saying. We now have Rogue as a high-value ally to keep alive with Med Team, but also Field Agent. I think that's kind of interesting. But mainly what I'm excited for here is Hangar Bay. So the big downside of Pericles giving, allies tough status cards, I said, was a tempo problem, but Hangar Bay fixes that entirely, because you give the ally tough, it blocks in the villain phase, and you ready it back up with Hangar Bay, and it's ready to go or block again for someone else. So focusing on the Pericles in a protection build, giving out toughs or stuns, using Hangar Bay to get tempo out of ally blocking, going to be a really, really fun way to defend for the table, which I really, really look forward to, because I hate exhausting to defend, but doing this looks really good. In basic, I just got to shout out Agent 13 again. put her in basically every Maria Hill deck is my current line of thought. She is expensive, and she has a lot of expensive stuff, which is the only downside. But Cersei will cheat her into play, and then it's going to be a good time for everyone. So I've talked about Sky Destroyer and Government Liaison earlier, but I think the Humble Helicarrier is also going to be worth considering. And last but not least, Superpower Training to get the Shield Director title upgrade to put counters on your big shield stuff. Incredibly useful, almost mandatory in my mind. Build support is still good because she's going to have a lot of good supports that she can get value from, even if it can only get the ones that are free cost or less. So no cheating in the Iliad with build support, but still good. In terms of what other heroes I think she'll play like, I actually think Ironheart, Rocket, and Venom could be in consideration. I think she'll be slower to get going like Ironheart, but have a devastating late game. Like Rocket Raccoon, you're moving counters around to power up other cards, which is really interesting. And like Venom, also a bit of a setup character to a small degree, even if he, is pretty strong quite fast. He has that multi-gun, which really does remind me of the Iliad, but that's kind of how they do things. In terms of what they do, I think Cable and Cyclops going for more of a supportive approach. There's going to be a lot of reminiscent things there in Maria Hill. So if you like these characters, you're going to like Maria Hill. I think even if you only like a couple of these, you might still like her. She does look really, really fun to me. And that brings us to my predictions. I put damage 3 stars. I think getting the Iliad turn 1 kind of basically guaranteed is very, very good. But she only has 1 attack. It's kind of a bit slower tempo. Most characters could probably do more than 5 damage on turn 1. So once the engine is going, damage is fine. Before that, it could be slightly tricky. It depends what the demands are on you. I think with that slower setup, in standard play, she's going to feel like her damage is really good. On expert, you might feel a strain for the first few turns. But I could see myself putting this up to 4 or even 5 if, it turns out to be easier to get the kind of, Iliad spam going, more than I think so already. Forwarding is 4 though. Just a 4 forwarding accessible from the Iliad turn 1 every turn basically is going to be kind of crazy. So viability, she's got 9 hit points, 2 defense, not that high, but she does have access to the Pericles, and she does have, it's just, I don't think she's going to feel as squishy as, let's say Hawkeye or anything like that. So I didn't put it down at 1 star, but we'll have to see how this works out. Economy, I put at 4 stars. Not only does she have the Cersei, accessible in every aspect, but more realistically, more grounded at a base level in her kit. She has 2 double resources, which add extra counters onto what she wants, and she has her own version of Web Shooter. So I think she's going to be just fine in terms of money. Speed of setup, I think, is the big downside. It might even go down to 1 star. I could maybe put up to 3 stars, though. I have to play her. I definitely don't think it will get to 4 or 5, maybe. But nonetheless, speed of setup for her, that's the weakness. I think that's going to be the first 2-3 turns. You're going to be doing less than another hero maybe could have done, and then things get crazy. Reliability, I put at 4, almost at 5. The ability to exhaust and get one of your important shield things early on is really, really, really good. And then the Iliad kind of covers everything you could maybe need. Card value, I put at 4. I was tempted to put it at 5. I had it there originally, but I do think the tempo is a factor. But I've got to see how it plays out in practice. Maybe it's not. I was worried, Bishop would be a little bit unreliable with all these resources, and there's an element of that, but overall, he's way more reliable than I thought. Maybe Maria Hill sets up faster than I think. Maybe the card value is even higher than I think. But I do think it's very, very good. I think her identity card is going to feel weaker than normal. I do think the reassignment action is good, but you've got to set up for it. But the engine she builds is where the real value is going to be coming from. And, that Director of Shield upgrade, that is like a 5 or 6 star card value. I normally only do up to 5 stars, but that could be 6. Ease of play, I put it 2 for now. It could drop down to 1. I think moving counters about is, a little bit demanding. But I don't think it's super complicated, especially because the Iliad seems like such an all-round problem solver. So I don't think you'll have to do everything optimally to do well with her, which is probably a good place to have, the character, easy enough to play, hard to master. But I think she'll be harder and weirder than usual. So I would struggle to see myself, on release, putting this above 3 stars at the very maximum. But probably realistically, I feel quite confident at keeping this at 2 stars. Variety, I put at 4 stars because the multi-aspect shenanigans, I think, do lead to a lot of possibilities. And, she has hooks in shield supports and counters, but also with ally stuff to use the counters on in weird ways. And in multiplayer, you can support people in different styles as well. So this might be 5 stars. I'm not quite sure. She's such a different character. Again, that's why the question mark is at the end here. I'm not really sure, but it looks hopeful. It looks really good. Fun factor is something I kind of refuse to rate because it's, what if I say this character is going to be really, really fun and they're not? I feel like I've misled you. But what if I say they're going to be, not fun and the character's not even out and I've not even played them? I don't think that is fair. But in this case, I'm going to make an exception and say she looks really fun. Just worried about the Iliad doing too much, especially in solo play, as I keep saying. But really, I think this is a hugely unique, really fun looking character that I'm excited for. And I hope I'm going to rate her higher than, maybe a few of the more recent heroes I've been reviewing. Looks really fun to me. I'm excited for Maria Hill. In terms of overall power, getting high card value, reliability, and economy, and forwarding actually, these are really strong places to get high scores in, and that makes me think she's going to be very strong, but she's going to be held back a little bit by tempo, which again, standard players might not even notice that and think like, oh, she's S tier. Whereas I think, expert players on the harder side might struggle with her in certain situations, early on. But nonetheless, I think she looks good. But I'm going to disappoint you guys, not because I rate her low, but because I'm going to be vague, because she is so unique, it's hard to call anything exact. So I'm going to say she's a top 25 hero. Let me explain. We now have 55 heroes in the game with Magneto, so she would be the 56th. And I can tell you right now, before even playing Magneto, the top 15 heroes are stacked, like really, really strong. So to get into the top 15 is very difficult, and I don't know how her tempo and getting different cards to line up with each other is truly going to work out. I would expect she's actually a contender for the top 15, potentially a contender for top 10, potentially really, really good. But I can't 100% say because she's so different and the top is currently so stacked. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is she going to be busted, or did this video make you think, oh, she has to set up a few things? It's a lot of money to set up, and, have I changed your mind at all? Or do you think, oh, she just looks super overpowered, which I don't think is out of the realms of possibility, but I do think she has some weaknesses that offset that as well. But ultimately, to me, Maria Hill surpassed my expectations. I'm really looking forward to her and really, really intrigued. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to join in the conversation, I read all the comments. I reply to a lot of them. Not as many as I used to because I get like so many of them. It takes so long, but I really appreciate it and read every one of them. Also, there's a link to my Discord below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much.